How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another Rip It Up music album review. This time we're going to be looking at the brand new sensational album from the Dublin-based post-punk revival band Fontaines D.C. Very quick reminder, if you're brand new, before we launch into this review, to please subscribe if you're brand new and like the video at the end, or even now if you're enjoying this review. Now, for those of you that don't know, Fontaines D.C. are a very exciting Irish post-punk band, becoming extremely popular amongst fans young and old, and they're on a similar scene to other popular punk bands at the moment, the likes of Idols, Shame, The Murder Capital, just to name a few. Now, last year they dropped one of the best albums in alternative music of the decade, an album called Dogrel, and it was their debut album. It was named the Rough Trade Album of the Year, and it was named the Six Music Album of the Year, so they're a pretty big deal. Now, I've seen that the lads in Fontaines D.C. have been talking about the pressure of following up on such a huge debut album for their second album. And while I do love Dogrel, and I think it is a sensational album, and I really like A Hero's Death as well, I don't think they've quite managed to produce as strong an album. It's, for me, this might be a contender for one of the albums of the year, but I think it's an outsider. It's not as strong as Dogrel, but that's not to say that this is a really good album, and you'll see that I absolutely love it from the rating I'm going to give it at the end of this video. So keep watching. So, A Hero's Death, it is again another beautifully poetic album. You know, Fontaines D.C. take a lot of inspiration from huge names in Irish literature, and also from the beat poets, you know, Jack Kerouac, Ginsberg, amongst others. So we get that same poetic flavour in this album, and it's beautiful to see paired with their classic noisy, distorted post-punk sound. We start off with I Don't Belong, and if this is your introduction to Fontaines D.C., you'd think, this is dreary, this is dull, this song screams the colour grey. But this is a bloody good song. I Don't Belong, one of my favourite tracks off the album, a great way to open, again, very poetic. You get a lot of Fontaines D.C. songs where they chant similar lines like a mantra. I Don't Belong is one of those tracks. We also have a similar thing in A Hero's Death, which is now my favourite song from the entire Fontaines D.C. discography, which is pretty impressive, bearing in mind some of the tracks that were on for the first album of Dogrel. Tracks like Televised Mind. Televised Mind is a great track from this album, and A Lucid Dream, ready for the mosh pit. It's just going to be insane when they perform that live to a lively crowd. And then we've got a bit of a change of scene in some songs for Fontaines D.C. And I think this is where this album shows progression of Fontaines D.C. as a band into a cleaner, maybe a more polished and mature sound, even though there's only 1 year between the albums, which I think is impressive. Love Is the Main Thing is not one of the tracks that shows a huge marked change, but I do really like that track in that it's kind of very poetic. And it's a noisy track as well, as just all these random noises thrown in between to create a sense of disorientation in the song, which is clearly done on purpose. It's not kind of shoddy, and it ends up being very trance-like, which I think is interesting to see in a post-punk album like this, but pretty good nonetheless. And we do seem to get quite a few, this change in sound for Fontaines D.C. in some areas. We've got some ballad-like tracks. You Said, for example, and Oh Such a Spring, which I think is a beautiful song, and there's not many times you can say that a punk band has released a song that is romantic and beautiful in every sense of the word. Oh Such a Spring is relaxing, just makes me think of spring. Now, I don't think there are particularly any tracks off this album that are particularly weak. There isn't a song in particular that I think, oh, this is dull. But after A Hero's Death, I do feel like the album is a bit anticlimactic. You know, Living in America, I Was Not Born, Sunny, and No, the final 4 tracks on the album. I don't think they're bad tracks, but for me, they're not like ones that I'm particularly going to remember from this album in particular. But I think that's a similar case with most albums, particularly alternative albums, although I can think of some exceptions. But overall, it's a solid album. And I think my reason for thinking it's not as good as Dogrel, which is a hands down 10 out of 10 album, I don't think that A Hero's Death has as many big and memorable tunes in the same way that Dogrel did. You know, if we're thinking about this beautiful album, sorry, I had to flex the vinyl. Big is a huge track. Too Real, Television Screens, Liberty Bell, Boys in the Better Land. Boys in the Better Land comes 10th in this album in terms of the track listing, Dogrel, and it's one of their most recognisable and catchy and best songs that they have, and it comes towards the end, and I think that's something A Hero's Death fails to do. It fails to keep up the momentum that maybe Dogrel had all the way through to make it an exciting debut album. I think the other thing is Fontaines D.C. making this such a good album. This is their second album, A Hero's Death, right? This is their second album, and they've kept up their momentum. It's not like they've dropped off to shockingly low depths. Making 2 albums in just over in 2 years, making 2 great albums in 2 years is a difficult feat, I think, for indie punk and alternative bands. And the fact that Fontaines D.C. have managed to make a great album in A Hero's Death, I think, is highly, highly commendable. So this album for me, I'm giving it a 9-. It's cracking. I think I'm probably being a bit harsh, but it's just because I love Dogrel as an album so much. So if you go and listen to this album right now, have a listen, see what you think. Think about how it compares to Dogrel, or go and listen to Dogrel if you're new to the band, and let me know in the comments what you think. But yeah, well done Fontaines D.C, because this is a bloody good album. Stop right there. I need to check a few things, that you have A, subscribed, and B, that you have liked this video if you did enjoy it. If you don't agree with what I've said, please don't press that dislike button. Instead, challenge me in the comments and I will probably bow down to your opinion. No, I'm joking. But if you're staying on YouTube for a bit longer, why not check out one of these videos? Okay, that's enough.